All right, Nathan. So
Okay,
we
we're
are
ready
ready.
to go.
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, everybody can see and hear me okay, and my screen's coming through.
Yes.
Terrific. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Document This, turbocharging your document templates with Power Automate. Been a fantastic conference so far, some really great speakers. Despite the rainy weather here in Auckland this morning, I'm pretty excited by what we've seen and heard so far today. And I'm really grateful for you coming along for the next few minutes we're going to have together. And I've got some exciting stuff to show you about ways that you can use Power Automate to help you out with document templates. My name is Nathan Rose. I'm a senior consultant at Intergen. I work with Dynamics 365 customer engagement, the Power Platform, and Microsoft Azure every day. And I am absolutely passionate about using the Power Platform to automate low value work in your organization to empower you and your people to do more of what you love. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about document templates today and ways to make them a little bit more manageable with Power Automate. I don't know about you, but for me, document templates would definitely make a top 2 list of troublesome items when doing Power Platform implementations. So let's get into it. First question on your mind is probably, what on earth are we doing here? Model-driven apps have supported document templates natively for quite a long time, and in the situations where you have some more exotic requirements, there are some real whizzy-bang ISVs that can be added into model-driven apps to handle document templates. The native document templates in a model-driven app are designed for a user manually generating a document. So your most common scenario would be a salesperson generating a quote for a customer. And when you need something a little bit more exotic, there have been ISVs like Expert Doc and Docs Corpac that have been around for quite some time. But what happens if using an ISV isn't an option? Your most common occurrence of this is going to be doing a small Power Apps implementation for a client who may well not have the budget for this. And despite this, they do have a requirement to either generate and populate document templates in bulk, or they need to run some complex calculations or some if-then type logic within their document template. And Power Automate is custom designed for situations like this. So let's get into the demo. So before we start the demo, I'll just give you a quick backstory of what I'm going to run through this morning. So I've got a very simple model-driven app that I've built for a fictitious organization that manages private investments for clients, and they manage this through their model-driven app. And they offer 2 different investment types to their customers, their investors. One is a partnership and the other is a company. And the difference between the two is the type of statement that's generated. So the partnership is going to send a single statement to all investors in the fund, whereas a company is going to send an individualized statement to each client. And of course, we need to retain the documents in SharePoint for access in our model-driven app later. So the solution elements that we're going to look through today, we've got our model-driven app that's built in Power Apps, that's sitting on top of Dataverse. Power Automate is the real workhorse in the middle here that's going to be moving data around, transforming it, and handling our integration tasks. I'm using the Word template connector in Power Automate. We'll use OneDrive for Business to convert documents into PDF, and SharePoint is the storage mechanism that we're going to use. And just a quick overview of the solution design. So you can see we've got just a very simple model-driven app. It's using the out-of-the-box contact table to represent individual investors, and then there's a few custom tables. So the investment would be the fund that investors are invested in. A holding would represent that investment. And then we've got the partnership payout and dividend payout tables that we use to enter in distributions to both of those different investment types. And the statements that we generate via this process are saved into SharePoint either against the contact for a dividend statement or the investment for a partnership statement. And then in terms of the process, so the user will manually create a dividend payout or a partnership payout record. And this is going to then trigger a Cloudflow to run in Power Automate. It'll get the data that we need in order to populate our template, populate the fields in the template, perform some calculations, and then it'll create a document, send it to the client, and then create that in SharePoint. So, quick, are there any questions before we head into the demo? Okay. Let's get into the demo. I'm just going to quickly swap my screen over. Okay, is my other screen coming through? Okay, I'll assume that's coming through. So before we get into the demo, before I get into showing you the model-driven app and Power Automate, I'll just quickly show you the document template that we're going to be working with. And actually, hang on, I just need to switch over to the other screen real quick. Sorry. Okay, so the first demo scenario we're going to go through is the partnership demo. So this is where we're going to create a single statement for each investor in the fund, and we're going to calculate their distribution based on their ownership stake and populate a table that we send out to everyone. So we're going to use expressions to perform some calculations and format the data. And then we're going to represent that via a repeating table with dynamic data and calculations. And then we will convert this to PDF and store that in SharePoint. So, okay, let me just flick over to my other screen. Okay, so this is the Word template that is kind of at the core of this process. So you can see that we've got dynamic fields that we're going to populate, and these are just plain text controls. And you may notice that I've added tags to these plain text controls. This is absolutely critical because when you get into Power Automate, this is how you know which field to populate in the Word template. When you call the Word template connector in Power Automate, it's going to randomly generate a schema. And unless you mark the names of these fields, it'll just have a random string there. So you won't necessarily know which data to populate in which field. And these can come through in random order. So it's absolutely critical to populate these with a tag. After that, we've got our repeating table. So this is just a standard table in Word with a header row, and I've created a dynamic field for each piece of data that we need to populate, and then wrapped it with a repeating control. And this is how the Word template will know to create a row for each each record that Power Automate brings back. So that's the Word template that we're going to be working with. So let's pop into our model-driven app. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a partnership payout row for an investment, and we'll see the flow go through this data and crank out a document template for us based on the data that it finds. So I'm going to do this on our Kiwi Partners 1 investment. We can see that it is organized as a partnership. And so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add a partnership payout record. So we're just going to add a new one, and we'll just enter in a random number, which is the distribution from this partnership. I'll add in another random number for the expenses, and we'll enter a payment date. Once I save this, these are calculated fields that will populate that we're going to use in our document template, and the flow will be triggered to run. So let me go ahead and save this. And so you can see we've automatically calculated our GST and tax and our net distribution to all of the investors in the partnership. And I'll come over, while this flow is running in the background, I'll just show you what it's actually going to do. So we can see that when that this flow is triggered when we add a partnership payout record. So that's going to trigger our flow. And the first thing we need to do is we need to initialize an array variable. This is going to capture the details that we put into our repeating table later on in the template. The next thing we need to do is we need to grab the holdings that are related to the investment that we've added this partnership payout row for. So this is going to represent each investor in the fund. And ultimately, we're going to create a row in our repeating table for each record that we find here. Once we do that, we need to grab a bit more data, and then we're going to populate our array variable. So you can see we've got some data that we're pulling through via dynamic data. I'm using a concat expression here just to format another piece of dynamic data, just to add a percentage sign, just to make it look a little nicer in our template when we create that. And then lastly, I'm going to perform a calculation here on the net payment just to show what's being distributed to each investor in the fund based on their ownership percentage. And I'm also going to format that as well, just to add a dollar sign. So that's kind of at the core of what's going to go into this document template. So once those populate, we can then come in and populate our document template. So we're going to use the Word connector, and this is where we select our template that we've created. So one thing to note, these are hard-coded to the connector. So that's how the schema generates. So it's not, unfortunately, it isn't possible to pass a dynamic value to this. So you do have to hard code the template into the flow. And so I'm going to pull through some data, and you can see I'm performing some formatting on these just to add dollar signs to these currency fields. And then at the core of this is our repeating table. And I'll just quickly pull this variable out. When you initially add this connector, this is what the table looks like. And so you can see you've got an input for each column in the table. And there's a control here that allows you to switch this to an input array. That's what you want to do in order to work with that repeating table. And you're going to add this variable that you've set in the previous step. And that's how that repeating table gets populated. So next thing we need to do is we actually want to create this file as a PDF, because it's something we're going to send out to clients. And so I'm using the OneDrive connector for that. There are several options available for creating PDFs with Power Automate. You can do it with SharePoint. You can do it with, there are some ISV add-ons to Power Automate that do it as well. I personally find that the the OneDrive for Business connector lets you do it in the fewest number of flow steps, and so that's why I've done it this way. As a quick call out, in a perfect world, I would use this. I would create a child flow to call this functionality, as I'm going to repeat it in the next demo scenario as well. And so ideally, you don't want to be creating this stuff twice. However, when I was building this, I was getting blank PDF documents back to my flow. So in a small sacrifice to the demo gods, I've used wet development instead of dry. So write everything twice. So once I've created my PDF document, I need to go ahead and send this out to the investors. So I'm going to go and I'm going to grab the contacts off of the holding rows that we found earlier in the flow. So I'm going to grab each of those contacts and I'm going to create an email and an attachment for each one with the PDF document that I've created. And once we've sent that to them, we then need to store this in SharePoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for the SharePoint document location for the investment row that we're working with for the distribution that we added to kick off this flow. And if we find a document location for that investment row, we're just going to go ahead and create the document in SharePoint. If we don't find one, I'm going to create a relative URL, which is for that investment, which is a concatenation of the row name and its GUID, and we'll create that document location for the investment, and then we'll create the file in SharePoint. And then to finish the process, I'll delete the file that we created in OneDrive for Business just to keep things tidy. So that should have given our flow enough time to run. And it has. So let's go back to our model-driven app, and we'll click into the investment row, and we'll go over here to Documents, and we can see that we have in fact created a document in SharePoint. So let's open up this statement, and this is the document that we've created based on that template. So you can see that we've pulled through some dynamic data from Dataverse and formatted it. And then for each row, we've pulled back data from Dataverse, formatted it, and performed a calculation. Just as a quick aside, these do tend to generate randomly. I suspect it's the order that they come up in the list function. But yeah, I've noticed that when you are creating these tables, that they do generate randomly. And then lastly, let's just go into one of the contact records, and we can see that we've sent an email to them. So this is the email that we've sent. And it's got the file attached to it as well. And so you can see this is the same file that we've created. So that's our first demo scenario where we use Power Automate to populate a Word template that has a repeating table in it to perform some calculations and some data formatting. I'll now move into our second demo scenario. And this is where we're going to use Power Automate to create an individualized document template that we're going to send to each investor in a fund. And so this is going to require some conditional logic to populate various fields. So we need to do some if-then considerations and then perform some calculations based on the result of that. Again, we'll use expressions to format the data, and we will convert this to PDF and store it in SharePoint once again. So let me click back to my other screen. Okay, so this is the template that we're going to be working with this time. Slightly different as there's no repeating table. We just have plain text controls that we're going to populate with data. Again, super important to mark these with a tag so that you know specifically what you want to put in there once you start working with this in Power Automate. Okay, so we'll go back to our model-driven app, and let's go to an investment that is organized like as a company. So this is one that we need to create a dividend payout for as it's organized as a company. So we'll come here and create a dividend payout, and let's just enter a random figure for the dividend payout and a payment date. And as soon as I click save, these are calculated fields that will determine the dividend per unit and the imputation credit. These are both required for our template. So let me save this. And so you can see it's already calculated our dividend and our imputation credit, and Power Automate should be running in the background. While that's running, I will show you what the flow is doing. So you can see that, again, this is triggered when we add this dividend payment row. And the first thing we need to do is we need to grab the investments in this fund. So this is going to search out the holdings based on the investment in this dividend payout row that we've added. Once we've got those, we need to get a little bit more data that's required for our template. And we're going to go ahead and populate the Word template. And again, you can see we've had to hard code this. It's just a requirement of using this Word template connector in Power Automate. And what I want to show you here is we've done some conditional logic in some of these fields. So for example, we have resident tax for New Zealand residents and non-resident tax for people who are not New Zealand residents. And what I'm using is an if statement to say, based on a field that I've got on the contact to denote whether or not they're a New Zealand tax resident. And so this is basically saying, if the statement is true, if they are a New Zealand tax resident, then go ahead and perform a tax calculation and use the 28% tax rate. And I'm also using this concatenation just to format this as a dollar value. I'm using it as well here for the non-resident tax. So again, saying if the contact is a New Zealand tax resident, if the statement is false, then go ahead and perform this calculation using a 15% tax rate, which is a little bit different. And again, we're going to format it using a concat expression to add the dollar symbol on as it's a currency field. So, and then same thing for the imputation credit. We're going to calculate that if you're a New Zealand tax resident. And then down for the total paid, I'm having to do this again because we need to I'm doing a simple calculation of your dividend that you're being paid out minus the tax. However, because these are being calculated independently, I've basically got to perform those calculations all over again within this field, combined with an if expression to say, if you're a New Zealand tax resident, do it this way. If you're not, do it that way. So just be aware that when you do have any kind of conditional logic or any calculations that have a dependency on another field within the document, you can get some pretty gnarly expressions that you'll have to input in to generate your document. So that's our Word template. Again, we're going to convert this to PDF. And once we've done that, we're going to create an email message for the investor along with an attachment. And once that's done, I'm going to store this in SharePoint. And again, same as before, we're going to search for the document location. Only difference is this time we're going to search against the contact. And if we find a document location, we'll go ahead and create that file and delete the OneDrive for Business PDF file that we've created just to keep things tidy. And if we don't, we're going to construct a relative URL for that contact, which is a concatenation of the contact's name and WID. We'll create a document location and then stick the file into SharePoint. So that's what this flow is doing. So we'll just take a quick look, and that has run. And we'll come back to our model-driven app. And we'll come here to investors, and let's go into a contact record. And so we can see, once again, we've generated an email for this contact. We can see this is the document template that we've populated for them. And so you can see the if-then logic has said we need to calculate New Zealand tax, but we don't need to calculate non-resident tax for them. And then we've calculated a distribution based on this dividend payable minus the resident tax. So that's the document that we've generated and we've emailed to them. And if we come back into the contact record and we go over to the Documents tab, we can see that we've created a document in SharePoint, and this is our document once again. So that's our second demo scenario where we use Power Automate to perform some calculations and handle some if-then logic within our document template. So that's the demo. Let me just quickly flick over back to my other screen. Okay. So takeaways. Things you need to be mindful of if you're going to use this approach for generating document templates. Firstly, if you're on a Power Apps plan, you'll need to be very conscious of the API call limits and flow runs. As you've seen, these can consume quite a number of API call steps when you're putting these together. So as a Power Apps user, you'd have a more limited number of API calls and flow runs. So you do need to be conscious of that. Another thing to be mindful of, I'm using the OneDrive for Business connector, as I've found that's the simplest way to handle PDF conversion. However, it does have some hard API throttling limits, which can impact your performance. From memory, it's like 20 API calls per second. So if you are looping through a large number of records that you then need to create PDFs for, just be mindful of that, as that can impact the performance of your Cloudflow. And then lastly, as I've called out, the Word template must be hard-coded into your Cloudflow. There's no way to pass it dynamically at this stage, as it needs to generate that dynamic schema. So you'll need to create a separate flow for each template. Otherwise, you'll need to handle that via a switch in your flow if you're able to. If you've got attributes in your model-driven app that would allow you to do that, then you'd need to handle that via switch. So when should you do this? I've built this in mind for someone doing a very small Power Apps model-driven app implementation. So if you've got a client who has minimal document templating requirements and ISVs aren't an option for reasons of budget or other reasons, it just being a very small implementation, then this can be a very good solution for some minimal document templating requirements. Or if you are on a larger client and they've got, say, 1 or 2 document templates that have some rather complex calculations or if-then logic are required, then this can be a good solution for those as well. However, if you do have a client that has just many document templates that would require a number of individual flows, then this is probably not a great solution, as that can get quite cumbersome. Also, if they have just very high volumes, so a high number of recipients that you're looping through that would imperil your flow run quotas or API limits, then this isn't necessarily the best solution. So that's a overview of how you can use Power Automate to populate document templates for various client scenarios. Thank you all so much for your time and for your attention, and I'm very happy to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Nathan. That was so insightful. I don't see any questions into a chat window, but
no worries.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Yeah, well, if no one has questions, we can wrap it there. Here's my details if anyone wants to stay in touch. Thank you so much for coming along. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, needs some pointers on how to implement this for a project you're working on, don't hesitate to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.